It was the day before Halloween, and my friends and I were scrambling for last-minute party plans. None of us had any solid invites, and we weren't the type to sit around on a night meant for fun. That's when Mia got a text from a mutual acquaintance, someone we barely knew, offering us an invite to a house party in the next town over. It was all very casual. "Come to Luke's," the message read, followed by an address and the promise of a wild night. A few texts later, and we were all in. We piled into Zach's car, buzzing with excitement. The drive was short, about 30 minutes, and we figured, worst-case scenario, we'd just leave if it was lame. The house was bigger than we expected, old but well-maintained, sitting at the end of a long, quiet road. The lights were on, and we could hear the faint hum of music from inside. As soon as we stepped in, we realized something was a little off. There was no sign of a typical party host, no one named Luke, at least. Instead, a man in his late 40s or 50s greeted us at the door. He had a friendly smile, but something about his eyes didn't sit right with me. He introduced himself as Hector, saying he was Luke's dad and that Luke was around somewhere. It didn't seem too weird at first, though. Maybe Luke was just busy. Besides, Hector seemed eager to make everyone feel welcome. Maybe too eager. Hector mingled more than any dad should at a party full of 20-somethings. He was offering drinks left and right, particularly to the girls. It felt like he was watching us, but no one seemed to care. They were already downing shots and playing beer pong. My friend Ava and I grabbed a couple of drinks Hector handed us and joined the beer pong game. The drink was strong, stronger than it should have been. But I shrugged it off. It was a party after all. That's what you do. A few rounds later, though, I felt off. Way too drunk for what I'd had. Ava was wobbling too, and I could see Zach and Mia sitting on the couch, looking equally out of it. I remember laughing, my head spinning, before everything went black. When I woke up, I was in Zach's car, parked outside my house. My head throbbed, my mouth dry. But the worst part was the confusion. I didn't remember leaving the party. Zach was in the driver's seat, staring at his phone, looking just as shaken as I felt. I asked him what had happened. He told me that things had gotten weird after I blacked out. Hector had been getting creepier, focusing too much on our group, especially on Ava. They'd all agreed it was time to leave, and right as they were making their exit, the police had shown up. There had been a noise complaint. That's when they noticed something none of us had realized before. The house was almost completely empty. No furniture, no decorations, nothing. Just people, beer pong tables, and alcohol. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. Zach said they had grabbed me from the couch and hurried out the back door before the cops saw them. And Hector? He had disappeared as soon as the sirens wailed in the distance. I tried to brush it off the next day, chalk it up to a bad night, but then I checked my phone. There were messages from Hector. The last one was sent at 3 a.m., hours after we had left. "Where'd you go?" it read. "Come to the door. I want to talk." My skin crawled. I had never given him my number. I showed the texts to Zach and Mia, and we all agreed something was very wrong. Ava was especially freaked out, saying Hector had been too close for comfort all night. We decided to go to the police. They listened to our story, but when they looked into the house, they told us it had been vacant for months. The previous owners had moved out, and the place was scheduled for demolition. The name Hector didn't match anyone who had lived there. Days passed, and we waited for updates, but nothing ever came. No arrests, no leads, nothing. The texts from Hector stopped after that night, but sometimes when I'm alone, I think I see a shadow out of the corner of my eye, watching. I never found out who Hector was or how he had gotten my number. But one thing was clear. That party was never meant to happen. And Luke? We never met him. Maybe he didn't exist at all. It was Halloween night, and I was alone at home, tasked with handing out candy. My parents were away at a party, and our house, tucked away at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, had seen only a handful of trick-or-treaters by the time the clock hit 8 p.m. The neighborhood had settled into a calm stillness, and I figured the night was pretty much over. My dog, Vado, a German Shepherd mix, was curled up by my feet as I scrolled through my phone, ready to turn in for the night. Around 9:30 p.m., well past the usual trick-or-treating hours, the doorbell rang. Vito shot up, barking loudly as he raced toward the front door. I was startled, considering how late it was for any more visitors, but I figured it was just a stray kid or a teenager hoping to grab the last of the candy. I opened the door, and my heart skipped a beat. Standing there was a man. He was tall, uncomfortably tall, and dressed as a clown. His face was smeared with greasy makeup, a smile stretched wide across his painted lips, but his eyes were cold. They didn't match the smile at all. In one hand, he held an almost empty candy bag, and in the other, something metallic gleamed faintly in the porch light. Maybe a toy. I hoped it was a toy. "Trick or treat," he said in a voice that was too deep, too slow, for what should have been a light-hearted moment. I froze, an uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. My fingers tightened around the door. Sorry," I stammered, trying to sound calm. "We're out of candy." Without waiting for his response, I slammed the door and locked it. My heart raced, and I stepped back, listening to Vado growl lowly. I expected to hear his footsteps retreat down the driveway, but they didn't. Instead, the doorbell rang again. My breath caught in my throat as I stood there staring at the door. My hands shook, and Vado was barking even louder now, his hackles raised. I could feel the sweat starting to bead on the back of my neck. The ringing continued, relentless, until it suddenly stopped. For a moment, the silence was worse. Then I heard a new sound. The storm door creaked open, followed by the distinct thud of someone knocking on the front door. The sound of the handle rattling filled the hallway. My chest tightened with fear. I backed away, hurriedly turning off the lights and grabbing Vado by the collar. Together, we dashed up the stairs to the second floor, where I frantically locked myself in my parents' bedroom. My heart pounded so loudly, I wondered if he could hear it through the walls. I sat there in the dark, clutching my phone. Should I call 911? Was this just a sick prank? My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. But before I could decide, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Scratching. It was coming from the window. Slowly, I crept to the blinds and peeked through a sliver. My stomach dropped. There, staring directly at me, was the clown. He had climbed a ladder, my ladder, from the backyard and was now peering into the second-story window with that same twisted smile, his eyes still void of any emotion. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice shook as I explained the situation, barely able to get the words out. The operator told me to stay on the line until the police arrived, but I could barely hear her over the sound of my own panicked breathing. Minutes felt like hours as I stayed locked in the room, Vito growling at the door. Finally, the distant sound of sirens pierced the air, and I dared to peek out the window again. The clown was gone. When the police arrived, they found the storm door latch broken and the ladder still propped against the side of the house, leading to the second-floor window. But there was no sign of the man. They searched the yard and surrounding streets, but it was as if he had vanished into thin air. Shaken, I packed a bag and went to stay at my friend Kira's house for the night. The police assured me they'd keep an eye on the neighborhood, but that did little to calm my nerves. I couldn't shake the image of those cold eyes staring at me through the window. To this day, I don't know if it was just a prank or if something far more sinister was planned. But one thing is certain. Whenever Halloween comes around, I make sure I'm never home alone. And I keep the doors locked long before the night is over. Some things are better left behind closed doors. It was the night before Halloween, and Brett sat with his friends in his newly renovated basement. He had turned it into the ultimate man cave, complete with a huge flat-screen TV, plush couches, and a mini fridge stocked with beers. Halloween had always been Brett's favorite holiday, and since this was going to be his last year trick-or-treating, he wanted to make it count. His girlfriend Amber and his two best friends, Ethan and Caleb, were all there, ready to spend the next 2 nights binge-watching horror movies. As they settled in for the first movie, the motion-activated light in Brett's backyard flickered on. Annoyed, Brett paused the movie and looked through the basement window. There was nothing there but the cold autumn wind swaying the trees. The light went off. They joked about it being kids playing pranks and resumed the movie. 20 minutes later, the light flashed on again. "Seriously?" Brett muttered, getting up to check again. This time, Ethan joined him. The two stared into the yard, but again, there was nothing. "Probably just a raccoon," Ethan said, shrugging. After the third interruption, they all laughed it off, teasing each other about how scared they were getting. When the light came on a fourth time, Brett was too tired to care. He stayed put, determined to finish the movie. The next evening, Halloween had finally arrived. Brett, Amber, Ethan, and Caleb decided to hit a few houses for candy before heading back to the basement. They all wore simple costumes, nothing too elaborate. It was supposed to be a fun, lighthearted night, but it quickly took a dark turn. As they walked down one of the streets, Amber yelped in pain, clutching her arm. "Someone just threw something at me," she said, wincing. They all turned to see a man standing about 15 feet away. He wore normal clothes, but his face was covered by a disturbing clown mask, the kind you saw in those viral videos from the infamous clown epidemic a few years back. His body was still, and though his face was hidden, it felt like he was staring straight at them. "Who the hell is that?" Caleb whispered, his voice shaky. The clown didn't move. He just stood there, eerily silent, watching them. Panic set in. They quickly decided to cut their night short and head back to Brett's house, laughing nervously to mask their unease. But the image of the clown lingered in their minds. Later, back in the man cave, Brett and Amber cuddled on the couch, trying to shake off the weird encounter. They picked another horror movie, hoping it would distract them. But halfway through, the power suddenly went out. "What the?" Brett muttered, grabbing his phone to check the weather. There were no storms, no outages in the area. "I'll go check the generator," he said, his voice tight with frustration. Amber grabbed his arm. "Be careful," she whispered, fear creeping into her eyes. Brett grabbed a flashlight and made his way outside. The yard was dead silent, the motion light completely off. As he neared the shed where the generator was stored, he heard a twig snap. His heart stopped. He shone the light toward the noise and froze. Standing by the shed was the clown-masked man. For a moment, they both stood there, locked in a terrifying stare. Brett's breath caught in his throat. His pulse raced. Without thinking, he turned and bolted back into the house, slamming the door behind him. "He's here," Brett gasped, locking the door. "The clown. He's outside." Amber's face went pale. "What do we do?" Before Brett could answer, they heard a loud bang at the back door, then footsteps. The clown had entered the house. "We need to hide," Brett said, grabbing Amber's hand and pulling her down to the basement. They crouched behind the couch, the only sound their heavy breathing. Brett clutched a beer bottle, ready to defend them. The footsteps above them were slow, methodical, like the clown was searching every corner of the house. The sound of the basement door creaking open sent a chill down Brett's spine. The clown was coming. As the footsteps descended the stairs, Brett tensed, knowing they had nowhere to run. But just when he thought they were done for, the blare of police sirens pierced the night. The footsteps stopped. Then, silence. Minutes felt like hours as they waited, But eventually, they heard the sound of retreating footsteps. The clown was gone. The police never found him. Though the night ended, the horror didn't. Brett couldn't shake the feeling that the clown was still out there, watching, waiting. His once cozy man cave now felt like a trap, and the fear of that masked figure haunted him long after Halloween was over. Brady had been planning this Halloween party for weeks. His parents were out of town, and the house was all his for the weekend. A perfect opportunity to throw the best Halloween bash anyone in their small town had ever seen. About 40 people filled the living room and kitchen, music blasting and everyone in full costume. From witches to vampires, his friends had gone all out. There was one rule, though: no strangers. Brady wanted to keep things under control, especially with his parents' house at stake. So everyone knew. No inviting random people. The night started smoothly, with drinks flowing, people dancing, and the spooky decorations adding a haunting glow to the dimly lit rooms. Brady, dressed as a pirate, was in high spirits, making sure everyone was having a great time. Around midnight, things took a strange turn. His friend Zeke came up to him, furrowing his brow. "Hey man," Zeke said, "have you seen that guy in the skeleton bodysuit?" Brady paused, confused. "What guy?" Zeke pointed toward the hallway that led to the stairs. "Tall dude, older. He's been walking around for the past hour. Thought maybe you invited him?" Brady frowned. He had no memory of anyone in a skeleton costume. Most of the guests were his age, college friends, and a few people from his high school days, but definitely no one older. "I didn't invite anyone like that," Brady muttered. "Let me check it out." He made his way through the crowd, asking a few friends along the way if they knew anyone in a skeleton bodysuit. No one did. His stomach tightened with a creeping unease. After a few minutes of searching, he finally spotted the man. He stood by the front door, tall and broad-shouldered, the black and white skeleton suit clinging to his form, a grinning skull mask obscuring his face. Brady felt his heart race as he approached. "Hey," Brady called out, trying to sound casual but firm. "Who invited you?" The man turned his head slowly, almost mechanically, to face Brady. His voice was low and gravelly when he spoke. "Tom invited me." Brady's frown deepened. "I don't know any Tom." The man said nothing, just stared through the skull mask. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them before the man finally moved. Without a word, he walked out the front door and into the night. Brady stood frozen for a moment, confused and unnerved. He quickly checked the house, making sure nothing was missing. Upstairs, all the doors were closed except for the bathroom. Everything seemed in place. As the party started to wind down, Brady couldn't shake the eerie encounter. His closest friends stayed behind to help clean up, and they chatted about the mysterious skeleton man. "That was so weird," said Katie, a friend from college. "Maybe he was just messing with us?" Brady shook his head. He felt off, like he wasn't just here for the party. I don't know. Something about him creeped me out. Eventually, his friends headed home and the house grew quiet. Exhausted, Brady got ready for bed. He glanced at his little sister, Rosie, who had been asleep in her room for hours. She was curled up under her blanket, peaceful and unaware of the night's events. Just as he was about to fall asleep, Brady heard a noise, a soft creak from upstairs. He sighed, assuming Rosie had woken up. But when he peeked into her room, she was still sound asleep. His skin prickled. The noise wasn't coming from Rosie's room. It was coming from his parents' bedroom. Heart pounding, Brady tiptoed down the hall and pushed the door open just a crack. His blood ran cold. Standing in the middle of the room, facing the closet, was the man in the skeleton bodysuit. For a moment, Brady couldn't move. The man hadn't noticed him yet. Slowly, Brady closed the door, his hands trembling. He rushed downstairs to where his friend Vinny was crashing on the couch. "Vinny?" Brady whispered urgently, shaking him awake. "He's upstairs. The skeleton guy, he's still here." Vinny shot up, eyes wide. "What?" They grabbed Brady's phone and called 911, whispering their situation to the dispatcher. As they waited for the police, Brady snuck back upstairs to check on Rosie. He shook her gently awake, putting a finger to his lips to signal her to stay quiet. Together, they slipped out the back door and ran to the neighbor's house. The police arrived within minutes, but the man was gone by the time they searched the house. A window in Brady's parents' bedroom had been forced open, and their closet door stood ajar. Inside, the safe had scratches on its lock, as if someone had tried to break into it. Brady stood in the cold night air, staring at the house in disbelief. The man in the skeleton suit had known about the safe. He had planned this. But the haunting question lingered in his mind, one that would never be answered. Who had invited him